During the time that I've owned the Sony A7 III, I've been very impressed with its autofocus capabilities. Obviously, it borrows the same sort of autofocus system that Sony fit in their flagship A9. And for general day-to-day photographs, obviously, it doesn't have any issues whatsoever. But I've been more curious as to how it handles kind of under pressure, if you like. So I've been photographing things like the kids running around and stuff like that to try out the eye autofocus on rather unpredictable subjects, and eye autofocus works an absolute treat. But last weekend I decided to put the camera through its toughest challenges as of yet, with the 100-400 GMaster lens. So on Saturday I took it to Oulton Park race circuit to photograph the British touring cars racing. On Sunday, I took it to RAF Cosford to the airshow, and then on Monday, I went to an area in Wales known as the Mach Loop, which is where the RAF do all their low-level training and stuff like that. So I'll break down kind of each day one at a time, and then I'll wrap it all up with a kind of general conclusion of how the camera performed, things like battery life and that sort of thing. Now, this might be quite a long video, I don't know yet, but just in case, here are the timestamps for every individual section if you want to jump ahead to a particular part of the video. But let's jump straight in with Oulton Park on Saturday. Now, Oulton Park race circuit, local racetrack to me, been many times before, photographed all sorts of different things there. Tend to try and go to the touring cars for the whole weekend. However, this year I knew that the air show coincided with it, so I opted instead to just do Saturday at Oulton Park and then obviously the air show on Sunday. But I did want to use it as a kind of test bed to push the camera to its limits to see if I could find any flaws, any issues, anything that would potentially cause me problems on the Sunday and Monday. I wanted to find out beforehand so I could kind of work out how to get around them. Now, touring cars aren't really the fastest motorsport around, you know, they're not F1 levels of speed. So in terms of straining the autofocus, you know, motorsport events like that aren't really all that taxing in the great scheme of things. So the first bit was on the exit of the last corner. Now, the cars would generally enter the last corner, kind of drive towards you and then drop down the hill. I was standing at the side of the track with a thick wire fencing. The cars literally came into view at the last second, just as they turned the corner and then began to drop down the hill. Autofocus system I found had absolutely no issues with acquiring and tracking even through the fence. I even tried a couple of panning shots going through that fence, and again, the camera never lost sight of the car once. Throughout the entire day, there's nothing really negative that I can say about the autofocus capabilities. The camera was absolutely spot on every single time. The only pain in the arse thing I found with this, and I think it's more just kind of this camera in general, not so much the higher end or different mirrorless systems, is the viewfinder. Because obviously in a DSLR, between every single image, the mirror comes back down over the sensor and you can see back through the lens. So when you are trying to track a subject, between every single shot, the mirror comes back into place and you can see where the subject is in the frame to know if you're kind of tracking too fast or too slow or you've moved around. So what I found was that I had to kind of trust my instincts rather than kind of react to what I was seeing in the camera. So, you know, if I'm tracking a subject and matching its speed and then firing a burst, just kind of carry on with it. Don't react to what I was seeing in the viewfinder, because then I would kind of end up throwing the composition off. And to be honest, it wasn't a huge issue. It was just having to kind of reteach myself how best to photograph. Because once I'd got that into my head, I never had any issues after that. So Saturday, camera passed with flying colours for motorsport. Then Sunday, I took it to Cosford Airshow. So Cosford Airshow, one of the biggest air shows that takes place in the UK every single year. And this year was particularly big because the RAF is celebrating 100 years of their formation. So they kind of went crazy with the stuff that they had there. You know, they've got ground displays of aircraft and other military equipment, stuff that you can kind of interact with, get on board with. They've got military personnel there, you can play around with the stuff, and then obviously they've got aircraft flying around on display. So I figured this would be a bit more of a challenge for the autofocus system in some aspects. Granted, the The subjects are a lot further away than the racing cars, but they're also moving a lot faster, and their kind of directions are a lot more unpredictable. They can go any direction they like, whereas obviously racing cars are following a set path. You kind of know roughly where they're going to go. And again, the autofocus was absolutely faultless. I think the only shot that I took the entire day that was out of focus was one shot of an F-16 that went behind a tree, which you can't really blame it for that. But it did manage to actually quickly acquire focus and take a picture of the plane as it was flying between two trees in the first place. So still very impressive. But overall, there was everything from helicopters, kind of slow-moving propeller planes, through to fast jets, and not a single missed shot. Even when the jets were kind of turning away from you and you get all the heat haze coming off the back of it, the camera was still able to lock focus on the aircraft itself by picking up like the wingtips and stuff like that. So 2 days, 2 tests, 2 passes with flying colours so far. Then comes the big one on Monday, the Mach Loop. So, the Mach Loop. Right, for those who don't know. In the UK, the RAF have 3 areas that they designate as LFA zones, or low-flying areas. These are areas that the RAF will use to train their pilots in kind of low-level flying. There's one in Scotland, there's one in the Lake District, which is in the north of England, and then there's one in Wales. Now, all of these sites are kind of in the middle of nowhere, you know, rural countryside, well away from any kind of busy towns or cities, because, you know, they don't want to disturb people, but they do need to practice. It's also well suited to them because of the hilly terrain, means they can get nice and low and they've got to change directions and, you know, can fly in amongst the valleys and stuff like that. Makes an awesome place for going to photograph them. But the problem with air shows is, one, the safety aspect of things. So obviously it's an organised event with big crowds, so the pilots are under stipulation as to how far away from the crowd they have to be in both kind of horizontal and vertical distance. Which means that unless you're shooting with like 800mm equivalent focal lengths, it's kind of impossible to fill a frame with an aircraft unless you crop in very heavily, which then kind of compromises detail. The other problem with air shows is obviously you're at ground level and the planes are always above you. Now, the planes do make the effort to, you know, kind of bank over and kind of turn and change direction and stuff, so you can see different parts of the aircraft, but they are kind of limited as to how much they can physically do. This is where the wonder of the LFAs come in. Because the jets like to fly inside the valley and you can get up to the top of them, a lot of the fly passes you are either at eye level or in some cases above the aircraft as they're banking and turning. So at air shows, obviously, the only background you ever really get when photographing a plane is just the sky. But at places like the Mach Loop, because you're in a valley and you are kind of level 2 or higher than the aircraft, you can see the ground or the horizon behind them. It just allows you to get a bit more of a perspective of where the aircraft is and how fast the aircraft is going. Now, just to give you some perspective as to how kind of close these planes do get to you at the Mach Loop, here is a piece of video footage that I took of a C-130 Hercules doing a fly-through. Now, as you're watching this, bear in mind, this is taken at a 28mm equivalent focal length. So they're only a matter of a couple of 100 feet away at most. And that was a kind of dawdling propeller cargo plane. So imagine what it was like when these started coming through at 400 and 500 mile an hour. If you want a better idea as to just how close these planes are actually flying to you in the Mach Loop, here is an image that was taken at Cosford Airshow the day before. Okay, now this is a straight out of the camera shot, which was taken out at 400mm. And you can see even at 400mm, the plane is kind of very small within the frame. Now, here's an image that was taken at the Mach Loop. And again, this is completely out of the camera, uncropped. But look at that focal length. I'm pretty much zoomed all the way out, and the plane still takes up more of the frame than it ever does at an air show fully zoomed in. Which means that obviously not only do you get a hell of a lot of detail in these shots, but when you consider these planes are flying that close to you and at that sort of speed, it really does put some pressure on the autofocus system. So it's a great way to test how good it really is. And I have to say again, This thing was absolutely immense. I mean, it locked focus every single time. The only shot where it actually missed focus was in this burst of shots where a camouflaged Hercules was flying over a green field, which is kind of the point of camouflage, really. So, but yeah, overall, you know, this thing was absolutely incredible. Even the F-15s, when they were whizzing past, the thing was able to acquire focus when they were just a blip on the horizon, and it never ever missed a beat once. It was able to track them perfectly, even at close distance, whizzing past, which has hugely impressed me. But let's wrap up with some conclusions. A7III, Sony 100 to 400 GMaster lens, absolutely incredible combination. You know, must have been, what, a 99.9% hit rate for photos, really. So, yeah, absolutely blown away with how well the AF system works. Now, for these, I was in high plus drive speed, which is 10 frames a second, and even with all that information being processed, the autofocus just absolutely nailed it. And obviously, the 100 to 400 lens worked fantastically well also. It was so quick to acquire focus, and between this and the camera, it just didn't drop focus at all. It tracked stuff beautifully. So, you know, shooting birds in flight and stuff like that, I don't think would cause this combination any issues whatsoever. Now, I'll be honest, it's not the first time that I've done racetracks or air shows or even the Mach Loop. Last time I went to the Mach Loop, I was shooting with the Canon 5D III and the 7D Mark II. And to be fair to them, the 7D Mark II with the 70 to 200 was kind of just as consistent as this. The 5D Mark III I found would occasionally lose focus when the aircraft got very close, but then, you know, it's an older generation camera. So I'm not suggesting that this thing is better than DSLRs or anything like that, but in terms of autofocus capabilities, it seems to be more than a match for the kind of higher end DSLR AF systems. And, you know, when you consider this is a entry-level full-frame camera and all the specs and everything like that, it just kind of clarifies to me that this really is, for me, for what I shoot, it's a great all-round camera. I'm not saying it's everybody's cup of tea. I am not going down that route today. Okay? But if you are somebody who dabbles in all sorts of different things, I've yet to find anything that this thing can't really do very well. Only kind of slight downfall, as I said, is the viewfinder lag. I think this is only an issue with this camera. I don't think it causes the same issues with the newer levels, and I'm sure when an A7 IV comes out, it won't be a problem either. As I also mentioned, it's not so much a problem, a blinding issue, it's more just a kind of, I needed to adapt the way I shot, but then, you know, you change camera systems, you always have to adapt the way you shoot. This is the only long telephoto lens that Sony natively make. You know, a 400 f5.6 for a lot of sports and wildlife photographers won't be fast enough. You know, Sony are working on a 400 f2.8 and they've got patents out for a 5 and 600mm f4 lenses as well. So I'm no doubt in coming years that isn't going to be as much of an issue, but it would have been nice, you know, particularly at the air show, to have that longer focal length just to be able to bring that subject a bit closer to me. Now, obviously, you have got third-party lenses and adapters, so, you know, Sigma MC11 adapter, you could fit maybe the 150 to 600s or even the 500mm f4. I don't know how well that would work. You know, maybe some point down the line, Sigma will bring out some native FE versions of those lenses. We'll wait and see. But those really are the only potential holdbacks at the moment, and like I said, I've no doubt in the next kind of coming years, those will be issues of the past anyway. Now, battery life. Battery life was one of the big things that put me, and probably quite a lot of people, off mirrorless systems for quite a number of years. Saturday at Oulton Park, yeah, I went a little bit crazy. You know, I was purposely trying to push the camera to its limit, so I was in high plus mode shooting 10 frames a second at pretty much every single car that I could get. Just literally trying to push the camera in any situation I could find to see if it would crack anywhere. As a result, a couple of hours, a shitload of cars going past, I took almost 2,200 photographs in that day alone. Now, on these days, I haven't actually been using the genuine Sony battery. I've been using the third-party LaFire batteries that I bought a couple of weeks ago. I've had the pair of them in a grip on the bottom of the camera. So started the day, 2 fully charged LaFire batteries in the camera. At the end of the day, 2,200 shots later, I was down to 6% on the first battery. So one LaFire battery fully drained probably would have got me kind of closer to 2,300 images. I've not actually really done any strenuous testing using the genuine Sony battery. When I first got the LaFires, I did a 4K stress test where I shot 90 minutes of 4K footage using a genuine Sony battery and then using a LaFire battery to see how much the batteries had drained during that time. I found the Sony lost about 50% of its battery life, whereas the LaFire lost about 70%. So in theory, a fully drained LaFire battery is about 3/4 the capacity of the Sony. So 2,300 images off a single LaFire battery, I should have got close to 3,000 images off a single Sony battery. So pretty impressive, I think you'll agree. So that's it. A 3-day heavy-duty test of the A7 III and the 100 to 400mm GMaster lens, and it's impressed me. But what do you guys think? You know, have you used this combination before? Have you liked it? Have you tried maybe the A9? Does that work better? Obviously, I would think it would. Are you kind of on the fence and this is swaying you one way or another? Are you kind of anti-Sony and this is changing your mind? Or are you still anti-Sony? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. And as always, hopefully, I will see you in the next video. In fact, I would say the only thing that surprised me more than the performance of this camera was the weather, because a weekend in Britain, you would usually expect some rain, but we had 3 solid days of scorching hot sunshine. I've gone slightly off colour in my face, and that is a hell of a tan line if I do say so myself.